Hello, I'm Scott Thompson, and welcome to After 10. President Park Geun-hye wrapped up her trip through 3 European countries earlier this month, in the same year that marks the 50th anniversary of formal South Korea-European Union diplomatic relations. On today's After 10, we are joined by Tomasz Kozłowski, the EU ambassador to South Korea, to discuss the significance of the 50th anniversary and the mutual ties that bind the two regions.
President Park Geun-hye returned recently from an 8-day visit to Europe. During her visit to Europe, President Park Geun-hye put emphasis on sales diplomacy and security diplomacy in bilateral summit talks with France, the UK, and Belgium.
전략적 동반자로서 새로운 글로벌 과제에 공동 대응하는 동반자로서의 위상을 강화해 나가기로 하였습니다.
At the end of the president's trip, Korea and the EU adopted a joint statement to mark their 50-year relationship. With the adoption of the joint statement, Korea and the EU agreed to fully implement the Korea-EU FTA and establish a sub-cabinet meeting for industrial policy to further consolidate the strategic partnership. They also shared views on the North Korean nuclear issue, and EU leaders expressed support for President Park's trust-building process on the Korean peninsula. President Park's visit to Europe stands to strengthen Korea's bilateral relationship with the region. On today's After 10, we take a look at cooperative measures that are currently being taken between Korea and Europe and discuss ways to further develop the partnership.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me here. It's my real pleasure.
Now let's start with President Park Geun-hye's trip to the 3 European countries, Britain, Belgium, and France. During her time in Brussels, she stopped by the headquarters, the European Union headquarters there, and held a Korea-EU summit with the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission. What can we look at as being the message, the takeaway from that summit?
The message from the summit is very clear. This is a clear confirmation that Korea and the European Union are reliable partners. They are ready to develop their cooperation, to widen the scope of this cooperation in economic field, in sectoral cooperation, and as well as political partners dealing with global, international, and regional issues. We have built our relationship for the last 50 years. We have achieved a very high level of maturity, and now we have to think, and our leaders discuss it in length, how we have to broaden and deepen our cooperation to be even more beneficial as it has been so far.
And you mentioned the 50-year relationship. This does constitute the 50th anniversary of relations between Korea and the European Union. There was a joint statement after the summit there. What stood out to you about the joint statement between South Korea and the EU?
Our normal practice is that after each summit with a third country, we issue so-called joint press statement. It's a record of what has been discussed, and practically that's all. But this summit was a very special one. In addition to joint press statement, our leaders issued a joint political declaration. Why? Because this political declaration is an expression of political will of the European Union and Korea concerning future development of our relationship. There's a political statement about directions of our future relationship, in what should be our objectives, what should be our main point of interests. And this political declaration will be a basic document for both sides, not for 1 year, but for few years to come.
And President Park clearly has an eye on the future relations with the European Union. She's the first Korean president to visit Europe during their first year in office. Why do you think President Park has been putting so much emphasis on relations with the EU?
First of all, we really appreciate President Park's visit to Europe during his first year in office. And we perceive it as a clear confirmation of Korean political will and interest to develop relationship with Europe, and a clear confirmation of practical interest of Korea to develop this relationship and to get benefits as much as possible. We really appreciate it, and it has been very much underlined by the European media.
Relations are often judged on achievements, on results. What can we look at from President Park's trip to Europe as being the big achievement there?
I mean, let's describe a bit the scope of our relationship. My understanding is that EU-Korea relationship is based on three main pillars. We have been developing our trade and investments relations for many decades, and for many, many years, practically it was the only one scope, the only one sector of our cooperation. And of course, trade and economic cooperation remains a key element of our relationship. But at the same, and the second pillar, we call it as a sectoral cooperation. It means that we develop our relations in such fields like science, technology, innovation, education, public diplomacy, civil society contacts, and so on. And the third pillar, which is quite new in our relationship, which I called as a political dimension. The European Union is becoming more and more important international actor. Korea has built its economic outreach all over the world, and now is developing its political outreach as well. That's why we have found each other as a good partners to work together to impact international and regional developments. That's why this political dimension is very important. And my understanding is that during this summit last week, for the first time, both sides for the first time recognized that the political and economic pillars of our relationship are equally important and very much complementary.
And part of the cooperation moving forward may be in the area of the creative economy. This is, of course, as you know, one area that Korea is pushing to start here. You, as I understand, are quite positive, are quite bullish on this idea of creating a creative economy. Why is that?
It's very simple understanding. There are two main reasons, as I understand, for coming up with this concept of creative economy. First one is that Korea has reached a very high level of economic development, but Korea needs to look for new engines for growth. And the second reason is that in this globalized world, we have to maintain our competitiveness. And it seems that the best way to cope with these two challenges is to develop creative economy, which I understand as an effort to make Korean economy more innovative, more creative, based more on science, research, development, and innovation. And in this context, I would like to underline that President Barroso, President of the European Commission, during the last week summit underlined that this creative economic concept is very similar with European Union policy, which is called Horizon 2020 concept. It means that despite of our economic difficulties and turbulences, we have decided to invest even more in the sector of science, research and technology. And from this point of view, I think that creative economy and our Horizon 2020 concepts are very similar, and this is a very good basis for deepening and strengthening our cooperation in this field. That's why we fully understand Korean concept, and we are doing the similar things, and this is a very good scope for or basis for our future cooperation in this field.
In terms of that cooperation, what can the two sides, what can South Korea, what can the European Union learn from each other? How can they work together in cooperating to achieve a creative economy?
What was decided during the last week's summit? First, and even before the summit, in June, Korea and the European Union held a joint committee on science and technology. And that time we identified priority areas for our future cooperation, which are biotechnology, energy, including smart grids, nanotechnology, nanosafety, and ICT, future internet. It means that these priorities are very future-oriented. And during the summit, the European Union and Korea signed an agreement of mobility of researchers, which will establish a basis for more exchanges in this field. I would like to underline that at this stage, the European Union has concluded such agreement only with two partners, with the United States and Korea. In addition to that, it was agreed to enhance our cooperation in the field of education. And even after the summit last Monday, a declaration on educational cooperation was signed in Brussels, as we are very much interested in enhancing our exchange of students, researchers, faculty members, simply to establish some kind of favorable conditions for exchanging ideas, views, and to work jointly on new solutions in the field of technology and science.
Korea and the European Union are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations this year. Last May, Korea and the EU held a reception to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Korea-EU diplomatic relations. Korea and the EU have deepened and diversified their strategic partnership in all areas over the last 50 years. We take a look at the development of Korea-EU relations over the past 5 decades and discuss the outlook for Korea-EU cooperation in the near future.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of formal diplomatic relations between South Korea and the European Union. Looking back over that 50-year period, how would you assess how relations have developed over that time?
First of all, we can be proud what we have achieved during the last 50 years. Don't forget that when we established diplomatic relations in 1963, since then we have observed dramatic changes on both sides. In 1963, the European Economic Community was a group of 6 European countries. Now we are 28. In 1963, Korea was 10 years after the end of the Korean War, struggling to come out from the ashes of the Korean War. And through last 50 years, we have moved from a stage of trading partners to really strategic partners, which are developing relations, trade, investments, science, technology, and in political field. It means that the scope of our relationship has been broadened in extraordinary way. And in 2010 was an important year for our relations. That year we signed the free trade agreement we signed a framework agreement, and we declared our relationship as a strategic one. And I can tell you that at this stage, after 50 years, the European Union and Korea have established the most modern, comprehensive, contractual basis for our relationship among all Asian partners. And we may be proud. And in addition to that, the summit decided to sign another important agreement, which will be a framework participation agreement on crisis management, which will add a new, more political dimension to our relationship.
And in celebration of that relationship, a number of events celebrating it have been planned. Tell us about some of them and what's going on right now.
This year is a year of celebrations. First of all, the biggest and the most important event was the EU-Korea summit, which was held last year. But in addition to that, I hosted here an event to commemorate the 50th anniversary with the presence of the Prime Minister of Korea. President Barroso attended a similar event in Brussels. We have organized a number of conferences, seminars, to discuss the level of our cooperation in different fields, and I'm very satisfied with an event I organized together with the Korean ambassador in Brussels. In May, we attended something which what I call as a caravan tour. I mean that me here, EU ambassador in Korea and Korean ambassador from Brussels, we together jointly traveled throughout Korea. We met students, we delivered joint lectures, we jointly met with Korean businesses to discuss the scope of our relationship. But the last comment is that this 50-year anniversary it's a reason for celebrations, but from the beginning, our idea was that this is the best occasion to think, first of all, about our future. That's why the summit was designed not only to commemorate our achievements or our anniversary, but first of all, it was a forward-looking summit. It was an occasion to think how we have to speed up, to deepen, to strengthen our relationship. It means that this anniversary is a very forward-looking occasion.
And one of the projects has to do with the internet, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit more about that specific project?
I mean, as I mentioned, the ICT sector, and first of all, future internet is one of priority areas for our cooperation in the field of science and technology. And our experts met recently to discuss practicalities. But one of the projects has been already launched, which is called the SmartFire project, which is a project under the EU program on future internet. And the project is designed and it will be implemented on the basis of a shared experimental facility located in different parts of Europe in Korea, and the main objective is to work on possible new internet protocols. This is only one of many practical examples of our cooperation.
Looking back at Korea's development over the past 50, 60 years, to say it's been remarkable would be an understatement. There's been quite a bit of economic progress here. What do you make of Korea's development over the past 50, 60 years?
I mean, first of all my European guests who are here in Korea mainly for the first time are really impressed by the level of economic and social development. I mean, that within 30, 40 years, Korea has transformed itself from one of the poorest countries in the world to a fully advanced country. And of course there is a very rational, very reasonable question, what have been the main factors actors. And my understanding is that this is a combination of a will of Korean people to sacrifice, to work hard, which has been matched with a wise leadership in government and business. It means that we can describe it as something like a social contract. The Korean people have been able to work hard with the understanding that fruits and profits of its economic development are benefited by the whole society.
Let's take a look at the Korea-EU FTA for a moment. It's been more than 2 years now since it came into effect. What have been some of the more positive effects over that time frame since it did come into effect?
First of all, allow me to underline that the EU-Korea FTA was the first so deep and comprehensive free trade agreement the European Union had entered into with a third party. The second observation was that the FTA with Korea, it had been a result of good development in our trade and investments relations during many decades in the past. 2 years, it's too short period to make final assessments, but even now we can make a few of them. First, this FTA is a win-win agreement between both countries. European Union and Korea showed to the world that despite of this global economic turbulences, the best way to go ahead with trade relations is openness, trade liberalization, which brings good results for job creation, for well-being of both nations. And despite this global economic turbulences, we have achieved good results so far. Trade is growing, investments are growing, and I'm absolutely sure that in the coming years we will feel positive results of this FTA even more.
What role does the EU expect from Korea in the near future? What types of cooperation does the EU expect from Korea?
I mean that our expectations are very clear and, to be honest, very high, as I understand expectations of Korea from the European Union. As I mentioned, Korea for us is extremely important trade and investments partner. And we are absolutely convinced that through the proper implementation of FTA, we will continue to be very reliable economic and trade partners. The second point is Korea is a very natural partner for the European Union while dealing with international, global and regional issues. Why? Because we share the same values, the same principle, democracy, human rights, open markets, trade liberalization, and at the same time we have common interests. These common interests are very easy to identify. Take global economic governance, climate change at the international level, but as well some regional problems on hotspots, stabilization of North Africa, development of sub-Saharan Africa, situation in Afghanistan. They have a real impact on Korea economic interest. Situation in Northeast Asia, on the Korean Peninsula. It means that we have identified a number of issues on which we can be partners. And working together, it's easier to achieve our common objectives.
We will look forward to that. Thank you once again. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time after 10.